Okay, welcome to Web3 Weekly with your host, Blockstar Technology.
Let's go. All right. Welcome, everyone. So today is our episode 24, and we picked a great subject today to talk about, which is the token mapping that was published by the Treasury here in Australia. And so what we have done is we have invited awesome two guests today to so it mainly to bring value to the conversation that can really help with bringing value to the industry, what's happening with the whole blockchain, the cryptocurrency exchanges, and there's a lot of talks happening at the moment. So we said, okay, look, who can we bring into this? And we found, the two best people that we know of. And let's start with Liam. Liam, please, do you mind just giving a little bit about your background and introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Thanks, Kazi. Really delighted to be here. I am a financial services regulatory lawyer, and so really come from that TradFi financial services perspective, and applying that that knowledge and that concept to the really exciting world of Web3. So my team focuses a lot on tokenization, how that fits in with the current regulatory environment in Australia and abroad. And we're really excited about the token mapping paper from that perspective, because it really gives you a good foundational underpinning of how to look at these things from, I guess, the lens that we look at things.
Awesome. Thank you. Mark, I would pass the mic to you now, my friend.
Thanks very much. Great to be here. So, name is Mark, and I work for a group called Not Centralized. We're a venture studio that does Web3 investment banking, so capital raising, restructuring, stuff like that. We work on projects, tokenomics, and all that. And then we run the Australian DeFi Association as our way of building the community, connecting the ecosystems. We're big believers in blockchain tech. And I guess the lens that I bring to this is more from the development side of things, and just an understanding of how token mapping will affect those that are actually building in the space here in Australia, or thinking about it. Because it could be Web3 folks, but even Web2 folks that are trying to come in and wanting to understand, is there going to be clarity around this space going forward? So yeah, I come with that lens.
Awesome. Thank you, team. This is really good. Thank you so much for your introduction. And just to give some brief summary before we really dive into the individual nitty-gritty things, I just want to give a little bit of background to the general public, because this is what we are getting into is a new economy. And in this new economy, it's like a digital economy now. Before we thought, okay, we are going to digital, but now it's like the assets and the whole thing about Bitcoin. And this is going to impact all of us in one way or another, whether we like it or not. And the Treasury published a consultation paper and given until 3rd of March to submit our take, or people's or professionals take on that, and how we can improve what it is. It would help them with the regulation and everything like that. So I don't want to say too much about it, but on that note, we'll dive in. All right, guys. Thank you. So the wording. So what's the first thing? Is a token. All right, Craig. What is a token?
It depends whether you're trying to differentiate between a token and a coin, but it's essentially a digital unit is what I'll refer to it as. Yeah. It can have differing values depending on what it is and what its use case is, but it's effectively a digital unit of
something. Yeah. Cool. All righty. So on that note, what is a token system? Shall I pass that to you, Mark? What is
sure. Well, anything that's used to facilitate how tokens move around. So basically, the smart contracts that people write, and we'll get into what smart contracts are,
Yes.
basically code that is designed. And if you get a bunch of these smart contracts and you create some sort of app or protocol, but basically how that token moves throughout a system to perform some sort of function, it's effectively that whole layer is seen as the token system.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And you just mentioned the word function, because I know that we're going to dive a little bit deeper into this. What is this function is? So, Liam, do you want to take on that, what that word means in the context of this paper, please?
That's a very big question. I think that the care with which you described what a token is, both Mark and over at Blockstars, is commendable, because I think the first thing that needs to be said about the paper is that it does talk about the variability of tokens. There is just such a huge range of different tokens, from ones that function in certain ways on a smart contract, which I'm sure Mark will get into, to others that are simply utility tokens. It's hard to say in terms of what their function is, because they all have different rights. They all have different characteristics. So the thing I really like about the token mapping exercise, and what Treasury should be commended on, is getting into the granular detail and understanding that these are all very different. Were we to treat a 14-year-old kid minting an NFT of a monkey the same as a high street bank creating a stable coin, I think that we'd have some headaches. And the token mapping paper gives us a foundation to say, hey, look, there's going to be different rights attached to these things, and that's going to mean have different consequences in a financial services setting, to start with, but the broader economy, which you mentioned as well. I mean, financial services, and this is the last thing I'll sort of say on it, is associated with crypto, but it's just such a small part of the ecosystem. And that's what I really like about the tokenomics paper, the token mapping paper. There's an implicit appreciation that this is the new economy. And while my world, it gets a lot of airplay at this point in the time, it really is just the thin edge of the wedge, in my view.
Awesome. Yes. Yeah.
So I just, before we dive too deep, can I get an opinion from both of you? Just overall, do you have positive feelings towards the token mapping consultation paper, or where are you guys sitting with what's been put out so far by Treasury?
I think it's positive that they're consulting with industry rather than just going out and enforcing. And no doubt, one of the things, I don't know if you guys had seen this, but one of the things that was kind of glossed over was that Treasury actually put out a media release along with token mapping, with the 70 pages plus however many pages in the appendices. One of the links in the appendices, for example, was going to a 500-page document. So there's a lot of homework that's been done here, right? No doubt about that. But there was a media release, 2-page media release by Treasury that basically said that they're looking to do more enforcement. They're going to beef up what ASIC has in terms of the capabilities, resources to do enforcement, because they want to protect consumers. There was a lot of protection talk. So you couple that with token mapping. So it's great that, there's this consulting part, but the people that were not doing the right things, and we'll get into that, things need to be thought about very carefully. This is not the Wild West crypto that you saw in 2020 and 2021. I'm still very bullish on this, because I do feel that there's many businesses, and the ones that are going to be that next wave of mainstream, that were just sitting on the sidelines because there was no clarity. They didn't know, does this fit existing laws, or is there going to be new laws? And we'll talk about that. But I think that this is good. We're taking the right and positive steps. And they say in there as well, they don't want to restrict innovation. They don't want to stifle it. So I'm overall positive. Liam?
I completely agree with you, Mark. I mean, our Treasury officials should be commended for really engaging with this emerging industry. They've done some heavy lifting here, and if nothing else, whether you agree with the, certain of the positions they put forward in the paper or not, I don't think anyone would deny the fact that they've done a lot of work here to create a foundation for which we can have a discussion and regulation going forward. So I'm quite bullish as well. I think it's a wonderful achievement, and it was delivered much faster than I had anticipated. So it creates a wonderful foundation for us to have discussions like this.
Yeah.
Hey, you both touched on how much work had gone into what the government has prepared and released here. Do you think that they have given us adequate time to respond? I mean, nobody knocked this paper up and went through everything that's supporting it, in the last 4 weeks. So do you think that the time that they've given enough people to respond is enough?
That's a good question.
Lee, you want to take that one first?
Yes. Look, having been involved in these types of consultations over a large number of years, I think this is pretty generous. This doesn't surprise me at all. Sometimes I've had 2-week timeframes to respond to things. This is why it is so important, and underscoring what Mark said and what you've each said, that this is fundamental and this will set the tone for years to come. Everyone needs to read it. Everyone needs to make their opinion heard. Whether or not people agree with each other is beside the point. We've got a month to do it. So, everyone from, DEXs to, centralized exchanges to advisors to devs need to be heard on this. Now's the time.
And on that, oftentimes when you have this, we had Caspers last year. So we had something like this that, previous government put in, Andrew Bragg, and then that changed. And I think one of the main bits of feedback was that we need better definitions, and we ended up with token mapping. So this is a good positive step. They do say that it's not like, okay, we'll do token mapping and then we don't know what's next. They say in there that the next step is going to be custody, and it's for the centralized crypto asset providers. So the DCEs, the digital exchanges. So we know that that's coming mid-year. There'll be another consultation paper. And with each of these consultations, there is some form of roundtables that they have with different industry groups. And the relationships that we've been building up as a DeFi community and national community with people in different government departments. And that's a thing maybe the audience needs to know. When we say the government, it's not just one area. There's multiple areas and layers of the government and multiple departments within those groups. But just from the talks that we've had, we know that they really want to engage with the community. And I'll be not surprised if there are roundtables that happen in the next few weeks. So I think even if it is this short kind of time frame, we basically got less than 3 weeks left. No doubt there's going to be active talks between government and the different groups, whether it's the exchanges, the legal firms, consumer groups and builders, etc. I think there's going to be some really interesting things happening. And it's going to lead up to the mid-year where we have another consultation paper that's going to affect centralized, things that are going on in the market, where the majority of people first come into crypto. So I think they're being very logical and smart about this. Time-wise, I think it's enough, because it's not like this is the first time they've done it. I think people have gone through this. Liam, it's no doubt it's not your first rodeo. It's our second. So it's certainly going to be interesting.
I really agree with that. I mean, there's multiple layers of government looking at this. So one of the legislation that came out, and it was quite niche, was on whether Bitcoin was a foreign currency. And going from the ground up, our submission was that, who cares whether it's currency or not? You can figure out that for yourself, government, but we don't even think it's legally property. We think it's just data at this stage. And that's a very technical legal distinction based on a couple of 100 years worth of law. And there is a raging debate in the legal community over that. And that's okay to have that debate. But the fact that people like myself think that it may be information, other lawyers very strongly think that it's property, means that we need certainty. So if it is property, and if our friends at the ATO can tax crypto as they plan to do, they should legislate that. Let's build from the ground up. So I've been summoned to Canberra next week to explain myself to a whole bunch of senators. And I guess that shows there, greens, red, blue. That shows the engagement from a very senior level of government with this across, elected officials and bureaucrats.
So, Mark and Liam, in terms of the approach the UK, Hong Kong, and America have taken, what are you seeing in terms of a targeted international approach? We know that America is coming from the direction of containment and wanting to separate it from financial products, but they are calling for a more international, alignment in terms of how governments approach it. And we did see a lot of these papers released at the same time, going through the the token mapping exercise. When you look at a lot of the stuff they refer to, a lot of the documents were released around the same time frame. You can see that governments are working together. What do you think is going on in terms of an international approach?
Oh, didn't you know it's Operation Choke Point 2.0? It's this big conspiracy to take no. I think that one thing we did notice, regardless of the timing, I think what was interesting was, for example, the MiCA regulations that are being spoken about in Europe. I don't know if it's been finally approved. It was supposed to be February 2023. Maybe Liam, you can talk more about that. But I just noticed one of the things that was really clear is that, MiCA is focusing on centralized exchanges first. We're focusing on centralized exchanges first. MiCA is saying things like DeFi is really hard. And it's, it doesn't quite fit if we're trying to map it to existing financial services legislation. I can't remember what, because they definitely took out NFTs for the MiCA thing. They're like, we're just not even going to touch NFTs. And you got to think that regulators are not this, as much as they may have seemed like, hey, made of buckets of money and stuff, they're still resourced. And when I say resourced, there's still maybe 10 people, 20 people, whatever it is. And that's why Treasury said we're going to up what ASIC has in terms of enforcement, because it's a resourcing thing. And when you've only got a certain amount of resources, you can't deploy that everywhere. You can't look at everything. And so it just makes sense that here's something that looks and acts and quacks like a security. It's easier for us to tackle something that, we already know about. We'll look at DeFi kind of later on. That was one of the first things I noticed between, say, us and token mapping and what Mike is doing in Europe. Liam, what did you think about that?
I completely agree with you. Look, and I think DeFi is quite a challenge from a regulatory perspective, because our traditional financial services, and like the US and the UK, focuses on products, and then you have issuers and distributors and so forth. It's really hard to fit that sort of financial services framework, which we've developed over centuries, on top of a DeFi. Who's the issuer of the product? Who's the distributor of the product? Which developer am I going to get to write a product disclosure statement for me? These are I think that the world at the current point in time, is obviously inconsistent in their approach to it. But hearteningly for me, I see a bit of an arms race going on in terms of the rush to regulate and thereby support Web3 businesses. You can see that in the UK with Rishi Sunak's approach to it. You can see that in parts of the US, if you take a look at some of the New York jurisdictions, and you can see us starting to get there as well. We're all taking different approaches, and we're all paying attention to each other, but we're all trying to get to what is a sensible level of certainty whereby both consumers are protected, which we all want, and businesses can grow with security and stability, which we all want as well. And we get a bigger piece of that Web3 pie macroeconomically. So we've taken the token mapping exercise. We're the first in the world to do that. We've got Oxford University and others saying, gee whiz, look at what the Aussies are doing. This is pretty cool.
Yeah.
It's not a bad start.
I think what's interesting as well is that there's also, what do you call it? Like when I first got into this space, coming from traditional finance, capital markets, etc., a lot of stuff kind of was, you learn about on the fly whilst the plane is flying, you're building it and stuff. But I remember very early on, people were saying that DeFi will never get regulated because DeFi, how are you going to, because it's so global, to Liam's questions, like where do you attribute, like who is the owner, issuer, product disclosure statements, where does that all kind of stuff sit? But then because it's also global, you're never going to get all these governments to agree with each other, right? That's such a 1 in a million, whatever it is. What's interesting is that two things. DeFi, I would argue, and similar to what the guys at Bankless say on their podcast, DeFi is regulated. And what I mean by that is the DeFi, real DeFi, the Aave, the Uniswap, the SushiSwap, that were purely run by code and not relying on people, processes, or procedures like FTX and Three Arrows Capital, which is very traditional kind of finance, because DeFi was run by code. It didn't fail. It did the things it was meant to do. Even when loans went bad, trades went bad, it paid people out, right? It doesn't rely on courts and arbitration. But the second part is that we can use blockchain technology, and we're building something, blockchain technology, to have legal compliance wrapped into the token. So imagine that when the ICOs were coming about, so the initial coin offerings in 2017, and even to this day, DAOs will promise people that you're going to get a certain vesting schedule of tokens, but it's a promise. And yet we've got this immutable contract, smart contract, that you can build these things into. You can build compliance and laws into compliance. For example, if you're not allowed to sell that token to retail investors, well, let's actually put that into the smart contract. So if there's some KYC and you're not a wholesale investor, you just don't get that token. We've got the technology that can do even better than old school traditional finance. It's ironic, but I think this is the kind of stuff that's going to come out, whether from Australia and others. We are sitting on some really interesting tech.
That is one of the most fantastic ideas. I mean, imagine saying to a regulator, you have a tech which Mark and his friends can build into something, and currently one type of consumer can get access to it. Your target market determinations on designing and distribution, you can bake into the code. Your wholesale retail, bake into the code. Your AML CTF, you bake into the code. That is regulatory.
Evan?
Yeah, I was going to say utopia. You know, you and are one and the same for ASIC and others. That's the possibility here. So that's why we've got to get this done correctly.
Yeah. No, awesome. There's some really awesome content, like, the information that, we spoke about here. There's so much to unpack just in that, 10 minutes.
Yeah.
There's so much, and I'm pretty sure we're gonna keep it like really to this 1 hour, and it would not solve everything, but let's get to the nitty-gritty areas. So one of the things that I'm going to talk about next is the multi-stage approach that these guys are using. I think they refer to one of the what do you call the bank, the international, like the bank settlement paper there as well, and they said about the banning or containing or regulation, like those three categories, like how would they categorize a function into one of those categories. So I would like to ask a question from Maureen.
Yes.
How would you see that being impacted, whether it's how would it impact, like whether it's negatively or positively? And then I'll go around the room. So
I think it comes down to really what they have control and how they view each product. So I think the categories that I was looking at one of the references, and it's the BIS bulletin. They seem to reference that quite a bit, and their approach to that was whether they were going to either ban it, contain it, or regulate it. And I think in terms of their control over a certain aspect, is that how they were willing to grow, in which direction. And I think that that didn't sound very clear at all, but I think that US is taking a really strong containment approach. And we read earlier today how they are planning to really separate the actual traditional finances from it, because they don't want crypto taking too much of the real economy, as they call it.
Yeah, that's
so
what they
that
call.
was a really interesting concept. They continue to refer to it as the real economy. Like, what are your views on that? Either of you.
Let's go to Liam first.
In terms of the US containment of the Web3 economy, my broad sense of that is that it is unlikely to be successful and that it is defensive. The US has so many ultra clever, ultra ambitious, ultra innovative people. They will find a way. That is what the US is famous for, and they're very good at it. And it is a little bit of a shame to see, reactiveness when approached with this. It's new. It is complex. It may be scary in some areas when you have, crypto mixers and so forth, and all of these other ideas. Certainly, the FTX experience was a very painful one for consumers and for policymakers. So you see the US far more so than than Australia at the current point in time, guided by consumer protection. It's understandable, but there always needs to be a push and pull between consumer protection and corporate growth. The US is probably over in one end of the spectrum after SPF's actions. It will right. When that occurs, remains to be seen. That's my sense.
It's interesting that what you said there, that people will find a way. It's almost like that Jurassic Park scene where they're like, oh no, the dinosaurs are never going to get out of this containment area, but life finds a way, right? Because they're built on the backs of pioneers, right? Like the Renaissance that led to the mercantile age and people sailing out of Europe and yes, conquesting other nations and whatnot. But it's that pioneering kind of this is what we're in right now. The space of crypto right now is going into that go west type mentality, and that's why they call it a bit of a wild west. And the laws and the regulations and the sheriffs, I guess, are coming into town. But it is interesting that the US, what was its core tenets of rebellion in a way, now it's like, hang on, now that we're in power, we want to kind of crush the rebellion, Star Wars reference as you may. But I see other countries, I think, seeing that and saying that we've got this opportunity to take the mantle, Australia being one of them. And to your point, Liam, like Oxford University, other Web3 publications globally are talking about what Australia is doing here. It's very interesting. We've got a great opportunity, which is why, it's 4 weeks, but given the massive opportunity, it is a great kind of, 3 weeks left really. So
yes.
Yeah. So I was just going to read that accurately. So from the BIS 66, and this is what a lot of the token mapping was split into at a high level. There are 3 potential lines of action that they have decided to split things into pursuing. And it was essentially ban specific crypto activities for their ban category, isolate the crypto from TradeFi and the real economy in terms of containment, which is the direction America wants to go into, or regulate the sector in a manner akin to TradeFi in terms of their regulation. So it was really interesting to see that they would split it up into 3 separate, such simplistic categories, as though everything can be defined so easily. And I think you might have commented on the example that they gave with the POAP and the selling.
Document, which is almost essentially going back to the old barter system.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you two guys on the call here are familiar with the POAP example they gave, but for anybody else that's listening, like somebody can get a POAP by, going to some expo, convention, whatever it is, a couple of years later, a competitor starts up and offers anybody that has that POAP from their competitor a discount, like $1,000 discount it was, to go to their expo. At which point, Bob can sell that to Fred for $500.
Yes.
And therefore, it's not the POAP that you look at, but it's the use of the POAP, which gets back to, the function of the token and what's being done with it. That's almost akin to, the old barter system where if, Bob puts out Fred's bin, then Fred mows Bob's lawn. I don't think they should have any reach over that either.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So I get that At what point, though, I guess is my question. Sure, okay, I get that in the example they gave with the POAP, there's an actual financial transaction going on. But what if that POAP gave me access to mentorship from somebody for X amount of hours? Are they going to go and put a value on every one of those to work out its, the
I don't even know how to track that.
Yeah.
No, well, that policing and enforcement is a whole nother matter.
Yeah. And do you think that was an approach from a taxation point of view to be able to tax the value on those things?
It's entirely possible. I also think that the US, and this is just my opinion entirely, that the US's approach to the containment and trying to separate it from traditional finance, as I will call it, not real finance, will have a lot to do with who it is that they're receiving their funding from and how much it'll impact their businesses. And, it'll all come down to lobbying at this stage, but I'm sure that it will change. As the guy said, it'll find a way.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot to, and we can't forget that, and coming back to the earlier point, the Web3 economy is going to take over in spurts and slow periods, different speeds around the globe and in different areas. One of the things, together with those who are building the Web3 community and those who are advising the Web3 community, that the regulators, to various extents, are conscious of, and one of the things we'll need to approach carefully is just the potential for what this means in terms of our how we conduct ourselves as a society. So Mark mentioned before the really exciting idea to me of baking in regulatory compliance into the code protocols itself, which is a fantastic idea. When it comes to POAPs and things like central bank digital currencies, you get into very interesting ethical territory whereby you can also program those particular tokens for social objectives. Should we be going to a central bank digital currency in the years to come, and, for example, the government decide to give me $10,000 in, some sort of central bank digital currency, but say to me, dear Liam, you can only spend this within the state of Queensland, and if you try and spend it within New South Wales, Victoria, or anywhere else, it will evaporate. That is obviously there is a range of ethical and societal considerations there, and that's a really basic capital control example. We all know countries around the world that have pretty stringent capital controls. So my sense of POAPs is, yes, they have the potential for great good, but there needs to be, the frameworks around them.
Yeah. I mean, you could almost combine those two. And I mean, taking your evaporation comment aside, if you were only allowed to interact using that token to something that did have the requirements baked in, as Mark was mentioning, then that would automatically help with consumer protections anyway.
Yeah.
But there is always the risk of overreach and overregulation.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, I am the new policymaker. I'm the new health minister for Australia. And, I have some influence in terms of welfare payments. And those welfare payments are going to come out in the form of central bank digital currencies. And if anyone spends those welfare payments on booze and ciggies, it will not work. They may spend it only on kale, spinach, and brown rice, because that will lead to a healthier Australia. I'm obviously exaggerating to be provocative, but I want to illustrate the very real considerations that those in the Web3 community and those in the policymaking and advisory community are going to have as this moves into the mature phase. As Mark said, this isn't 2020. There isn't crypto cowboys, to the same extent as there was. This is serious people, serious next-gen economy. We need to go about it in a methodical way, as the token mapping paper is doing.
Yeah. And so in terms of what are your views, it's looking like there's going to be a lot of licensing brought into place, AFS licensing requirements, and potentially stablecoin licensing. Is that what you took away from the token mapping exercise? We've reviewed other papers and they seem to all want governance and licensing. I think it was backed one by one, and it had to be possibly withdrawn at any time it was drawn, and banks don't even have that regulation.
Yeah, I mean, Charlie got a good point there. I think with you mentioned like what you said, like, oh, if you go to the bank and you can't really get your money out.
Yeah.
Well, if we all went to the bank, they'd run out of actual physical cash. I believe about 90% of it is backed by a digital database where we've come into fractionalized banking over the years, where the banks only need to hold about 10%.
10%, right? Yeah.
Yeah. But I've seen the same thing. But coming from a government's perspective, I do understand if all this money is getting transferred, it affects a whole economic imbalance of a third-party currency for GDP and a lot of other economic things. Money's getting siphoned out, but nothing's coming back in. And that's what I've seen them sort of worrying about on the stable coins, and especially seeing Luna, the algorithmic stable coin crash. And I feel most of this has come from, as we spoke at the start, they're coming for centralized exchanges. What have we seen over the last year or two?
Yep.
Centralized FTX, Celsius, BlockFi all lose a lot of consumers' funds.
Yes.
And then stablecoins pose a risk to economies themselves. And also, how do we trust them? There's been, for many years, there's been certain things going on about like USDT, Tether, whether it's backed one-to-one. And always wonder, if you're backed one-to-one, how are you operating a business on that scale? I understand if they have a tax built into the smart contract where every transaction they may get 1%.
Yeah.
But if they're not doing that and they're saying they're backed one-to-one, and we've also seen BUSD come under scrutiny recently as well. So what do you guys think, Liam and Mark?
Mark, you kick off and I'll pick up.
Oh, we can't hear you, Mark.
There we go. I thought I pressed the button. I was just saying there's a lot to unpack there. So, I mean, if we take it from the operational kind of standpoint, one of the things that kind of keeps bubbling up here whenever you talk about regulation and like where we're heading, if we take one step back first, the purpose of this, if you were to explain it, you run this through ChatGPT, you go, explain token mapping to a 5-year-old. It's like existing laws, new system, trying to figure out what parts of new system are part of existing law. Other stuff we figure out later. And because of that, I think that it makes logical sense when you see things like, okay, maybe they're just being protectionist about what they're doing in the US. And because they recognize that if this is going to be the new way that fintech is, like, if you believe that this is a natural evolution of fintech, you're going to act a certain way here in Australia because maybe we didn't have as much support for fintech, in the early 2000s to 2010s and stuff. And this is our chance to redo things. I think that there's going to be a lot of, when the answers all come through, I think that there's going to be a lot of people that will be supportive of having regulations over the actual crypto, the centralized crypto space. But when it comes to the decentralized stuff, that's going to be really interesting. I've seen some responses coming back so far because we're collaborating and, bringing in what the community wants to put forth. Not everyone in the community wants to be docs. Not everyone in the community wants to put forward an answer to everything. So they want to come to a group like ours to help them. But one thing that is really interesting that's just kind of singing along in the background is that this is almost like Spotify at the moment. I think we're going to have like a Spotify type thing where DeFi or anything decentralized, you're either going to have regulated or you're going to have the Pirate Bay. The Pirate Bay and Spotify are still there. I mean, many people are surprised that the Pirate Bay is still around, but it's a choice of risk that people take to choose to VPN, for example, and use something that is effectively illegal, or pay for a service like Spotify. Spotify didn't mean that we wrote new music legislation and copyright laws for music. They fit it into existing and maybe made some slight tweaks. I feel like history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And they did that for a very good reason. I feel like that's kind of where we're heading to. So all of these things, like this attack on BUSD, or if you don't see it as an attack, it's like just protecting the community, or saying that we're doing this because of all the fraud. And when you look at Chainalysis, fraud's like this, right? All of these things are a lot of noise. And when you filter through that, the signal seems like that's where we're heading. We're going to have a regulated and unregulated DeFi. We're going to start off with centralized first. Sorry, maybe that's a bit of a kind of tangent, but that's kind of the feeling that I get from overall with this.
Awesome.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I think that and to in picking up on the rhyming pattern, I mean, you've got the traditional financial system right now, and then you have a lot of share trading. In fact, a great proportion of it done in dark pools on the dark web over in the US, where you're moving securities around, you're moving other sort of assets around in the dark web. There will be blockchains. There will be particular chains in the futures, ones that comply with regulations and ones that don't comply with regulations. And there will be, I guess, user choice with user consequences in that regard, especially in the DeFi space. In the CeFi space, that's a little bit easier from a regulatory point of view. And they're crying out for certainty and regulation. To the extent, looking at Australia with custody and with licensing, a token is a bit of an avatar of, a bundle of rights, which can be traced back to financial products. If you're dealing around with derivatives, if you're dealing around with pooling assets, and getting returns and so forth, and if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, in terms of financial product, sure, regulate it like a financial product, but just make sure that you're really granular as to where you draw the line, which I think is what this token mapping paper aims to do, and cut out all the utility tokens, cut out all of the, payment tokens and so forth. We're seeing the UK do that in very granulated steps, and I think Australia is off to a really great start. So, yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, please go ahead.
So I was just wondering, both of you are obviously going to make submissions on the consultation paper. What are the main parts of feedback you intend to give back to the Treasury for this consultation paper?
I
think
more.
Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, I kind of alluded to. So we're actually doing 2 submissions. One from the community. The joys of wearing the community hat means that you don't get sleep, but that's okay because it's all worth it. I get energized by all of that. Meetups and all this kind of stuff. What you guys do at Blockstars really well. But we're going to do something from the community, which is a collaborative response from many different facets of the community. And then we're going to do something from Not Centralized, my venture studio group that, builds stuff. And I alluded to before that, we are building, and we've raised some pre-seed money for this, and we've got some connections in, and we've got people that are wanting to use these like compliant tokens. So, a very simple high level is that we're going to be talking about how we can use blockchain to bring and foster compliance in the space, because we're not trying to run away, right? I think if you have that kind of attitude, you're going to soon run out of countries to move to.
Good one.
We need to embrace the fact that we can have a very nice, more like Bitcoin came around because of the inefficiencies of the market in 2008 and the GFC. We should not forget that. And what people have been doing is trying to get short-term gains and wins and stuff. And so I think what we're really pushing is we'll comment on, if we think that these definitions are okay or what needs to be improved, we'll definitely comment on all of that. But we are providing examples as well of how we see the future kind of looking. So that's kind of like my outlook, and we're dividing that between the community collection of responses from AusDeFi and then what Not Centralized talks about, basically.
Awesome. Yep. That's great. So guys, we're just coming to the last 10 minutes of this podcast. I'm so conscious of everyone's time.
Should we see what Liam wants to add to the feedback here, Liam?
Yeah.
I'm interested in hearing what Liam, what kind of feedback are you going to be providing?
Thank you. I'm going to stick to my knitting, which is as a financial services regulatory practitioner, and my comments are really going to be, again, with the benefit of mainly the CFIs, around where I think I can add value in terms of definitional approaches so that we capture the aspects of Web3 that should be regulated because it is so closely analogous to, the traditional financial infrastructure. I'm going to make that link, and I'm going to make it as tight as possible as the first one, because I want I want sensible and proportionate regulation. We're also going to draw those broader distinctions in terms of custody and in terms of the requirements of traditional finance, which has worked there, which may work within a Web3 context, but push back on areas where we think that it has potentially strayed too far and is not as tightly considered as it has been in traditional finance. So mine's a very granular, narrow focus, whereas Mark and others have a broader focus. And I think between all of the different papers and coming back, Treasury is going to have some great reading material. They can all cancel their Netflix subscriptions.
Awesome. So I guess I just want to touch base, guys, and ask the first question in the consultation paper, which is, what do you think the role of the government should be in the regulation of the crypto ecosystem? We'll start with you, Liam.
It's a big question. I guess it depends on what your conception of government is, and different nationalities have different conceptions of how their government should work in terms of the level of interaction the government of the day should have in their lives. And this will differ from citizen to citizen in Australia and certainly from country to country. Government, to my mind, needs to balance protection of citizens versus economic growth. And I think that the government here needs to achieve that aim to the minimum extent possible. We need government to create a fair, competitive playing field, but stop there.
Awesome. What about you, Mark? You're frozen there, Mark.
I think the connection looks like it's lagging. Oh, yeah, Mark, I think we got you there.
No, it froze. Trying to unmute it. Back about that. It froze as I was trying to unmute it because, anyway. I like, if I'm still answering that first question, that question from there about like government. Oh, are you guys hearing me okay?
Yeah,
there's a bit of a delay, but it's all good.
Oh, look, so one thing, I see the government as being, if you're a parent, right, you could treat your kids like an engineer would, where the problems that occur, you want to fine tune it and get into the detail, and you want to steer and you want to control. Or you could be like a shepherd, where, you have nothing to do with how the sheep were created. You are just merely there to find the right pastures, the right grazing, the land, you are there to merely guide, right? And I think, and protect from wolves, right? So whatever those colloquial wolves are, I feel like the government is there to protect us from that, whilst also ensuring that whatever this sheep thing is, these technologies have the right pasture to grow. So I feel like they've got more of a shepherd's kind of mindset, or they should, rather than being engineering, where an engineer knows what he knows or she knows and will try to fit things into that paradigm, whereas you don't know where we're going to go with this technology and how great it's going to be. So that's one. The second one is that being, different governments and people and cultures have different viewpoints, which is why I think it's going to be very hard to have global compliance. And another thing that, I think blockchain can do is that you can have a token wrapper with compliance features for Australia. If it needs to go to the US, it gets burned here and wrapped in another token that has US compliance. And here we get to facilitate what we've already got in, the traditional financial systems for cross-border trade with compliance and regulation built in. It's none of this. We need to have one overarching global government because we've got different cultures, to Liam's point. And I think where we're going to be is that we'll have a mature system that is more about efficiencies, but it's just going to be finance. It's just going to be commerce. It's just going to be whatever industry is. It's not, we always get enamored by new technology, AI and all this stuff. These are tools. We will just continue with whatever that industry was about. So, that's my 2 cents.
Awesome. I think that's great. Like, have you guys got any last thing that you're going to discuss in the last 5 minutes?
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes. Okay, so they always say that regulation can risk stifling innovation. Do you think that there's any chance that the token mapping consultation, the regulation they want to bring in from it, will risk stifling innovation?
Liam?
There's always a risk that regulation will stifle innovation. I think the gains to be had, but on the flip side, and to pick up one of Mark's earlier comments, I'm really bullish on the sector, and that's because of the regulation. I think that overall regulation builds innovation because there are a whole lot of people looking from the sidelines who say, I really like what I'm seeing. Once it's a little bit more settled and safe, I'm going to jump in because my idea will beat everyone else's idea here. So I actually think that once we get the regulation calibrated and right, that innovation will follow.
Yep.
Awesome. Same question to Mark.
Yeah, I think that it depends, which is not a great answer. I should have been a lawyer because my answer is oftentimes contextual. It depends, but it really does. There is a non-zero chance that we will stifle innovation. It's not zero. It is somewhere north of that. But I think just given the evidence, given the people that we get to meet, whether at meetups or conventions that are from government that are wanting to be educated and learn, and there's, as we said before, different parts of the government, I think there is more force towards being positive in terms of what we can do rather than trying to extinguish the flame that is blockchain tech. So I think it's unlikely we will see. And look, put it this way: someone will go, "Oh, look, I'm stifled. The new laws stifle me because, well, what were you doing? Oh, was this, token where I take money from these guys and blah blah blah, and I don't want it to be security." Well, I'm sorry, but you're not going to be in the majority there. So there's always going to be outliers, but I think for the most part, it's not going to be stifling. My guess. I'll put my house on that.
I have one more question. In terms of the proposal to introduce licensing, do you think that will raise the barrier of entry if they have to, introduce expensive licensing or, regulation around financial licensing in this sector?
Like, do you mean for crypto exchanges or the?
Just they mentioned licensing in a number of things with stable coins, exchanges, licensing for any tokens that look like they're dealing with financial investments, assets, anything like that. The requirement for licensing. I think we spoke about it before in terms of like mining and stuff, how when they introduced licensing, they really, increased the barrier to actually enter for the people that were.
I guess, in my opinion, it's, do we need licensing or do we need proof of reserves there and proper auditing? But what do you think, Mark?
I reckon that it's going to be interesting that in one hand, like when we look at the world, we look at it through our own lens. People back in 2000s could not have imagined that we would be talking on smartphones and doing all sorts of things. And this is a supercomputer in your pocket. We could not have imagined that even with the Blackberries that we all loved back in the day. But we are working in a space where tech, it'll seem like if there's licensing burdens like that, oh my God, it costs $1 million to have that kind of license. How am I going to do that? But we've got blockchain tech, which when you look at the core tenets of it, it's got automation because of smart contracts. It's got transparency, easier value transfer, security. And those core tenets build up into something that is there to reduce barriers. So even if we have these higher levels to, bring about consumer protection and to bring some professionalism to the space, we've got the technology that can make that easier to gain access to if you're legitimately trying to do the right thing. So whilst we'll have some pull on the one side, we'll be able to push others up because of blockchain tech. I think that's where I see it heading. And I hope that builders take that into account when they, go out there and work forward.
Awesome. Liam, your take on this?
I certainly think it will create a barrier to entry, but that's in the right areas.
All right, short and sweet. And that's how.
And we hit the 1 hour mark.
Yeah.
All right, so we are just hit the 1 hour mark, and I just want to say thank you to everyone taking precious time from your day to add value to the Web3 blockchain community. And I think we are in in these very early stages of coming up with new things. And look, what I heard was whatever we come through, it's sort of something that fit all. There will be outliers, and some will lose out, some will gain, and with anything, right? With everything, there's nothing that was introduced like everyone won. Even with the money. I mean, we had this money for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Exactly,
all
right?
the people
All the time. So, and there'll be a lot more discussions around this subject. And I just want to say thank you again to Mark and Liam. Thank you so much for your time, guys, and we'll definitely catch up again in the future.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks,
And
guys.
thank you to everyone else who joined us, through Twitter, Insta, YouTube, Twitch, and LinkedIn. Yeah. On that note, guys, thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks.
See you
Thank you,
guys.
boss. See you guys. Bye.
Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Same time, same place.
Subscribe.